Hi everyone, welcome back from the break. Before we get to this next panel, which I'm really looking forward to, I would like to remind you of the hacking competitions in the Hacking Village. There are some really cool things going on there, like ICS Humla penetration testing and Hack the Bank, where you actually get to hack an ATM and get the money inside. Also the IoT Village, where if you hack Internet of Things devices, you can actually take them home afterwards. So do go by and have some fun with that. And now it's time for the panel of the day. And we're debating a hot topic in cybersecurity, which is the current challenges of cybersecurity policies and legislation. And here with us today are some of the people who are closest to the action. I'd like to invite on stage Cătălin Drulă, President of the IT Committee from the Chamber of Deputies, Cristian Cucu, CIO of the Secretary of State of the Romanian government, Cristian Drigă, Counselor for the Cooperation Department at CERT-RO, and Bogdan Manole, Executive Director for the Association for Technology and Internet. And our moderator today will be Lucian Constantin, cybersecurity journalist and contributing writer for Forbes, Vice, Motherboard, The New Stack, and Security Boulevard. You've certainly read some of his pieces. If not, it's about time you did. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here. Looking forward to your knowledge. Thank you.
Hello. Thanks everyone for being here. We're gonna open this with a short presentation from CERT-RO because they are the central authority in this. They will play 3 roles in the implementation of the directive, and Christian will go through what the directive goals are, what companies have to do, and how will CERT support them.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cristian Drigă. I'm a counselor in the Cooperation Department at CERT-RO. And let's get started. So, our panel, current challenges of cybersecurity policy and legislation. Actually, regulating cybersecurity is a huge challenge, not only for the legislative bodies, but also for the industries and those who are called to apply it. So, especially because in real life, when you want to protect the citizens, you appeal to emergency services, police, and military. If you want the same in the cyber world, things get a lot more complicated, especially because the whole cyberspace is actually a landscape which comprises nothing from the physical world, but it comprises services, providers, software running in a certain way. And all this makes the digital landscape in which we act. So, in cyber life, you need also awareness, self-protection, and responsibility of all the actors involved. Main challenges in regulating come from the fast-changing landscape, because all this can change from one day to another, and cyber threats and technologies evolve very fast. Transposing this in a law which actually can be applied is especially challenging. And to give you an example, in 2000, when the Convention on Cybercrime was issued and adopted, we defined then information systems in a certain way. Today, everything around us is information systems, which makes it very difficult for authorities to defend every Internet of Things device and intervene if they were hacked or they led to damages. You also need a multidisciplinary approach not only legal specialists, but technology specialists, and in cybersecurity specialists. And to make it even harder, if you issue a regulation which does not take into account the businesses, the way things go on the digital life, you are in danger to actually killing, let's say so, the digital society. So simply mapping into a law known processes from real life is close to impossible if you do not take into account the specifics of the digital landscape and the digital life. As a core guidelines, you have to start from the principles you want, set durable and strong principles, then develop broad definitions because they evolve very fast, notions which you use, identify all the processes and things that change and develop for them in a law processes that can ensure upgrade of the law quickly than the mainly legal text, and then put at the core of everything in this domain information sharing, cooperation, education, because we all rely on self-awareness to actually get along with this new landscape in which we are living. So the EU directive is a continent-wide challenge to ensure and create a unified cybersecurity preparedness and incident response mechanism. So challenges, as you see them listed on the slide, vary from the differences between the capabilities and preparedness of the member states to multiple services and activities which you want to protect, to standardization, which is very fragmented, still very fragmented at EU level, and of course you need cooperation and unified practices to reach the unified cyber system and to regulate for the future. So in a single slide, the NIS directive can be summed up like this. On the European ecosystem, we have the Commission, European Commission, and the ENISA as regulatory bodies, and together with the cooperation group and the CSIRT network, which have to unify practices at EU level, both in regulating and also in actual intervention and response to cyber incidents. On the other side, we have national single points of contact through which the states should interact in NIS related matters and alerts. And at national levels, starting from the NIS strategy, then national legislation which has to be transposed, the competent authorities, CSIRT teams, and of course the directive addresses to operators of essential services and digital service providers. So actually the directive obliges the member states to adopt legal frameworks for and strategies and designate competent authorities, national CSIRT teams and single point of contact, identify in a period of time the operators of essential services and the essential services, impose the security and incident response requirements, and ensure effective measures and application of the transposing law. As you know, the Ministry of Communications and Information Society has issued a law proposal for transposing the NIS directive. And in the following few slides, I will outline some of the processes that were behind creating this proposal and the main points of the proposal. So, aside from the deadline, which is May 19th, 2018, which requires that we have a fully functional legal framework, the adaptation to the national realities and creating a functional system, both internally and also as a part of the EU system. The team also had in mind to ensure the longevity of the law, because everything, given the fast evolution of the digital landscape, and also to provide adequate resources for this, and encouraging the cybersecurity market, and to make all actors involved to be responsible on their actions and in applying the law. So, the NIS transposition proposal designates the National Computer Emergency Response Team as main authority in NIS, and as point of contact and national CERT team. Essential Services Operators Registry is mainly the list which will be built up with the operators that are identified according to this law proposal. The authority will establish security and notification requirements through subsequent legislation and acts issued by the authority, so that they can be adapted and issued new versions according to the evolution of the situation. Of course, the project has also cooperation mechanisms and a mechanism to ensure the compliance with this law proposal. To encourage the cybersecurity market, the law, the proposal has some provisions only for a certain type of services, because first of all, you cannot identify and put into regulate all the services, and second, because you want to leave the market free to evolve. So the law proposes sector and wide certs and private CSERT services, which require authorization in order to keep them up to date with the evolution that occurs in application of the law. So also the security audit for the operators of essential services and for the digital service providers subject to the law are required for the same reason to have to be authorized by the authority. The processes in the project, in the law proposal, are start from the incident notification, which is done to the national CERT team immediately after they are discovered. We know that an intruder can be in the network of an entity up to 200 days before it is the intrusion is discovered. So at least you want to receive the notification in time to be able to actually act at the national level. We envisioned service like similar to 112 or 911 service like where the incidents are evaluated and the corresponding authorities which can intervene are alerted, and also the other member states which may be impacted are also alerted. And the CSIR team at national level would provide guidance in managing the incident and would cooperate with the other authorities. Also, the law has some precaution measures taken, starting from the confidentiality of notifications and of the information provided to the authority, which are actually the base for also for the cybersecurity services in real life, are ensured also in this law proposal. Standardization is done by going through using internationally accepted standards and the ENISA recommendations, so that unified system can be reached also at European level. And cooperation, of course, is the basis for everything in this transposal of the directive. All in one, and to sum it up, actually, when you read the directive, you initially think you can transpose it quite easily. But aside from the technology you have to take into account and the evolutions and the landscape, when you actually start making a law out of it, you go to such diagrams, and so starting simple, actually you end up with processes and a lot of things to take into account. This would be it for now.
Okay, thank you. And I hope that puts things into perspective and clarifies a bit what the law tries to achieve. I'm gonna go now to the legislative part of the because the law has to the proposal has to become law by May 9th, and also it has to be accompanied by all of the technical documents and norms that describe what does minimum security requirements mean exactly, what are the thresholds where you are considered a critical services operator, and what are the certification plans for auditors and things like that, certification requirements for auditors. And when do you expect this to be finalized, given the normal legislative process where it has to go through commissions and then through both chambers and so forth? And do you think it leaves enough time to companies to prepare? And also, if you have any already, based on this proposal, if you have ideas for changes that we're going to propose during the legislative process.
Thank you. First, let me clarify a little bit what the roles are in the Romanian legislative institutional framework. I'm the head of the IT committee in the Romanian Chamber of Deputies, which is the lower house of the parliament. But also on matters of IT is the decisive chamber. So in terms of transposition of European directives, and actually a lot of the legislation in a given sector, perhaps in a somewhat unexpected fashion or a bizarre twist of things, it's actually the executive body in Romania that does most of the legislative work. What happens for directives is that usually the ministries in the corresponding sector or the authorities, such as CERT, they draft a law which is then submitted to the parliament, and indeed the decision and amendments and so on happen in the parliament committees and eventually in the plenary session. So in terms of a calendar, This rests mostly with the government at the current stage that I'm not a member of, but maybe our colleague can tell us a little bit more. At the current stage, the law has not been adopted by the government as an official proposal. So that's the first step. That's when the formal process of the law begins. I don't know when that date is going to be, but at that point, it comes into the parliament and then we discuss it. Also, in terms of the specifics, as you mentioned, all the further legislation, that definitely also rests with the government, like the secondary and tertiary legislation, which defines the nitty-gritty details of the implementation. In terms of where our responsibilities really are, they begin when this project is submitted to the parliament. And what we will do for sure is to organize some serious debates because we have some concerns about how this law is, about the draft. We think it's a good project, both the directive. We think it's urgent because, as you mentioned, there's a deadline there. But Romanian administration is very good at transforming anything into red tape and bureaucracy. So we want this to really improve the security of the various systems that are essential for the country, and not to become just more bureaucracy and more permitting and another level of headaches for actors in the field. In that sense, I think it's essential that several principles are built into the law. Transparency, which I think there's somewhat a lack of in some respects. An emphasis on cooperation between stakeholders. Usually the Romanian system of responsibility is very centralized. You go to this authority, you get a permit, you get authorized to do things and so on. And I think there's also another concern that I found in the law is that the central authority can be financed through the fines that it levies. I think there may be a conflict of interest there. Like you might be, there might be an incentive.
Overreach to issue fines just to get a budget.
Yes. There's also the concern of there's a lot to do for the central body, and I don't envy you. I don't want to be. We don't want to be in your shoes. It's very centralized. There's a lot of roles, and I'm worried about the capacity, about whether there will be capacity issues, whether you will have the right resources to implement all of these roles and responsibilities. That all of that being said, those concerns, we are fully supportive. And we will do our role. We will have the public debate in the parliament, which has the final say on the form of the law. So amendments can be brought in, concerns can be raised, and we will open up to a very serious debate with all stakeholders in the parliament when this law reaches us.
Okay,
when this law proposal.
I have a question for the audience. By raise of hands, can you raise your hand if you are in a leadership role in your organization? Like management and things like that, okay. And how many of your organizations do you think are gonna fall under this directive, which includes essential service providers and also digital service providers in the context that they offer services to essential service providers? Okay. Yeah, if you want to respond to some of the issues.
I would like to add something to what my colleague said. First of all, the draft proposal, the proposal was not developed by us as an authority. It is the Ministry of Communications initiative, and there was a working group comprising of many institutions and other ministries. Second, in the interest of keeping this panel not too long, of course, I didn't go through the principles and the um, the part that would address some of the concerns raised here, but the transposal of the directive means also transposing the principles from the directive and also the precautions taken there. All in one, the public consultation period prior to sending this project to the other ministries and then to be adopted and forwarded by the government to the parliament is still ongoing. So there is also time for input and for improvement. It is only the initial draft that to get things started, as we also have the deadline on May 19, 2018. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And because this directive, this law will also cover essential services in the public sector, and we have the government's CIO here. What is the government's take on this and its role in identifying its own essential services and the requirements of this legislation? Is the government prepared, or the public institutions, are they prepared to respond to such incidents and comply with this legislation?
Well, I think it's too early to, hello everybody, first of all. I think it's too early to talk about preparedness as long as we don't have even the initial draft finalized. I'm more concerned about the technical aspects and the nitty-gritty stuff because those will be actually governing the way that public authorities will implement and will cooperate with the CERT team to make sure that the directive has very strong roots in and the principles are being uniformly adopted. So from my point of view, I think we are probably 2 to 3 months away from getting more technical input from ENISA and other European bodies that are covering the secondary and tertiary levels of the legislation, which will give us more input on the specific technical aspects that we need to cover in the future. One initiative was that we are still fighting for is related to creating a government agency to handle the governmental cloud. And not only that, but the technical aspects of public administration. And that incorporates an initiative to have a sectorial CERT or CERT team for the entire public administration. And I was looking at this opportunity to have some sort of a pilot of a sectorial CERT and how it would cooperate with the CERT raw team in order to implement the NIS directive. So we will see how things are evolving, both in terms of the legislation and these other initiatives. Another optic on the whole process is that security has been compliance-driven for several years now, and we see this European initiative aligning itself a little bit to the US initiatives in terms of putting more formats out there for companies to be able to properly address the IT security issues. There isn't still, to this day, there isn't enough awareness, and even if this has been built up by compliance in the US, I think in Europe and specifically in Romania, we still don't have the level of awareness at the CEO level that will allow us to make the proper investments in IT security. We don't comprehend well the risks that the companies are facing. So that compliance is one way of putting more more action and defining better the space, at least for those important information systems that are critical to society. And a lot of those are in public administration, but within this directive, we see a bit of a shift towards the private sector and maybe the banks, hospitals, and other companies dealing with a lot of people. Airports could be part of this sector defined as essential services operators.
Do you expect, in terms of budget, do you expect new budget requirements for the public institutions, because they will have to comply with this? So they will have to allocate resources, they will have to externalize some services, obviously, contract external services if they don't have in-house specialization.
Definitely. But again, we need to look at the technical specifications of the law, and then we will understand the types of technologies that we need to implement. It's similar to GDPR. There has been a lot of noise on implementing this regulation as well. There are a lot of technology solutions that are covering parts of the GDPR process, and it will be the same with the NIS directive. There are also a lot of processes that need to change with the companies so that these regulations and the regulation and the directive are being respected. So definitely it'll be a new security market, and again, it's part of the compliance-driven security market, not awareness-driven and or risk-based driven. And we're aligning ourselves a little bit to the U.S. market from this point of view. We will still have probably more regulation in the healthcare industry, like we know it's in the U.S. and other areas. But this is a very strong step in addressing critical systems and how they should be protected and how the incidents should be reported so that everybody is aware of a problem.
Thank you. I'd like to also get the view from the civil society's point of view in terms of transparency, because the law has some stipulations that the data is confidential, and obviously we're talking about a public institution and the government, and they represent the citizens, and the citizens' interest should be served ultimately here, and citizens have a right to know when an incident happened because of a cyber attack and impacted their lives. They suffered the power outage, or hospital systems were down, or they didn't get their water and things like that.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. First, before I answer your question, and I add a few more that I think that are interesting for the public, I have to say that the proposal is not that bad. However, the last time when we talked about the cybersecurity bill, and we were very much against it because it provided access to computer system by the security services without a warrant, which actually was turned down by the Constitutional Court. So that was very bad. This is not that bad. This is improvable. However, it appears that the idea that we'll get a much larger cybersecurity bill is not over. So I see this as an opportunity to discuss about principles of cybersecurity that might apply also to other sectors as well in the future. So on this perspective, there are, I listed 4 points, but I add also the transparency one that I think it needs to be considered by the public. And I'll put the transparency at last, not because it's not important, but I think there are other issues that are more pressing for the current audience. First, the current proposal establishes a system of authorization of security auditors and CSER teams. And the European Union directive does not include that. So basically what CSER does, it says, if you want to do any kind of security audit to the companies that are under this regulation or CSER teams, you need to pass through some kind of authorization system that we create, and we establish the rules. And by the way, we also take the fees for that, which will become part of our budget. So this is a very strict regime, which basically creates a new business or a new profession that is regulated. And what we've seen also in other fields, but also in the field of physical security, is that this has been hijacked by other interests than the market. And also what, at least in the current format, does, it excludes any foreigner cybersecurity expert to be able to do these audits. So we think that the solution that the government is currently proposing is wrong, and they should either have a free regime, so where actually, for example, the bank that wants to do the audit decides who is capable is doing the audit on their own system, or in the worst case scenario to include some kind of simple notification system where you just notify the CERT on what kind of auditors you want to use. The second thing is the sanctionatory regime. So I think that CERT should very much focus, and I think they try to do that, on cooperation and partnership with the private sector. However, the current proposal actually has fines which are up to 5% of the turnover of a company, which is huge if the company has more than 2 million lei.
Can I ask a question
Yeah.
here? Because isn't this because of if you have some fines, the value-based fines and not the percentage-based fines, for some companies they might be a lot. For multinational companies, there might be nothing,
Well,
right? And then you need to have a percentage type of fine so that you can put pressure on the multinational companies who can afford paying the small fines, and they wouldn't otherwise care, because when it's a percentage of their revenue, then it matters.
Well, I think you need to look at the profit margins in every sector. But I know a lot of sectors, including the essential services, when the profit margins are very low. It's like 1 or 2% of the turnover. So if you suddenly have one potential 5% of the turnover, that means your profit for 5 years. I think that's huge. And it's, again, it's not a problem that, I mean, I agree with the principle that it should be a percentage of the turnover, but I disagree with the amount. I think that 5% is really big, and we see the danger, and we saw in other line of businesses in the Romanian society, that sometimes when the government needs some cash, they do this, and they go with fines, and especially with 5% of the turnover, that's a very big amount. That can bring a business, a company out of business. Just to finish the other points, the third point that I wanted to raise, and I think that's also important, what the current draft law doesn't tell you is the fact that when you inform the CERT.ro on incident notification, even though they have in the law an obligation of confidentiality, they might not exonerate themselves from obligations to report to the law enforcement authorities. So, and this is a very tricky subject. It's general. It's not just with this directive, but this is a very critical issue, in my opinion. And they should have a very clear policy on how they treat the incidents that are reported to them in relationship with other law enforcement authorities or with other authorities, such as the Data Protection Authority. The fourth point is related to the fact that, according to the current draft law, they may do unannounced controls, including getting documents on any registries, financial documents, commercial documents, and any other kind of documents or acts, which is a lot, and it looks more like it's a law enforcement body than a cybersecurity one. And then the last point would be the transparency one. The current draft foresees that basically all notifications are exempted from the public document status. So that would also mean that you might not get some kind of statistical information, or companies might misuse that in order not to make public certain incidents that they don't want you to be aware of, even though there is a public interest in order to do this. And this is something that we've also discussed yesterday during the official public debate at the ministry. So there, we got some answers from the...
I have a feeling you want to address some of these points.
So many questions in a row. I will need Bogdan's help to remember them. and to address them. First of all, yesterday was one public meeting and debate at the Ministry of Communications. We received and the ministry will take into consideration all the suggestions. Of course, feedback from the market is welcomed, so that this law actually, this law proposal actually gets better. It's improvable, of course, but getting to the points which Bogdan mentioned, first of them, the authorization regime. Actually, the problem which we also see in our often in our society is that audits and some other similar activities do not keep the pace with the actual evolution of the real life landscape. So the mechanism for authorizing auditors was conceived as a need to ensure that by the evolution of technology, threats, and so on in a year, 2 or 5 years from now on, somehow we ensure that the audit mechanism also upgrades, the audits also upgrade. This was the starting point. Of course, the main proposal actually tries to define a general framework for which will have subsequent legislation that will take into consideration everything that we have to comply with coming from the European Union, including recognition of certifications and of the auditors authorized in other states. Suggestions on how to improve the actual text are welcome.
I have a quick one. Delete those articles.
Before we go to the other points, and I'll let you go to the other points, I want to ask our other panelists if they have something to add to this particular issue of creating basically a regulated profession of auditors that need to be certified here, because in my view, if you have like a multinational company that has branches in different countries where this legislation will be implemented in some form or another, and they get like a contract with an auditor for all of their branches, it means that auditor needs to be authorized in Romania. I mean, if every country would have a stipulation like this, a requirement like this, then a company would either have to hire auditors in each country or go to an auditor who is accredited or in all countries. So that kind of poses a problem.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, I think those are very legitimate concerns. I'm also worried about creating artificial businesses. We've done that a bunch in Romania previously with many other auditing kind of jobs, like there's the environmental thing where there are questions and others. I don't think we should. A lot of this law a little bit sounds that if put into action the wrong way, we could create kind of, and this is not translatable, but a sanepid, a health authority that everybody's scared of. They will come and fine you, they will take 5%, which I agree is ridiculous, and that definitely won't pass the parliament, 5% of turnover. Or at least nobody in their right mind would vote for that. It's enormous by any. I mean, the margin of profit. I mean, is less than that for a lot of businesses. So I'm very skeptical. It's a good idea to create this kind of regulated new new type of consultant, right? I think that would not that will only serve to create bureaucracy and hurdles for the businesses, and would not really help with what the directive actually aims at, which is improving security.
Just a small comment as well. Related to auditors, I tend to agree that over regulating this may be a problem. I think there are auditing bodies with international reach that can be mentioned as being supported or exactly. I would rather put more focus from the regulation side on the awareness part. And I would, for example, I would ask the auditors to formally present the report to CERT from those entities. There won't be hundreds or thousands of entities, so it could be, for example, a process that each entity would then need to present their plan and support their actions in the future. In the end, the final goal is to have a more secure operator, not just showing them the stick. Or other ways, for example, putting together the template of the report and specifying exactly the types of actions that you want to get out of that report, and make sure that even if the auditor is not of the best quality, they still need to produce the results that you're interested in. So formalizing a little bit of this, but not putting I don't know, a new type of business into the market could be a better approach to this.
Thank you. Do we have microphones in the audience? Okay. If some of you has questions related to this, we're going to take one or two questions, depends on. Okay.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mircea Grigoraș. I would have a question for Mr. Drula and Bogdan Manola. How would you say it would be best to ensure that the auditors are doing their job? Because at this point, what the directive says is that the national authority is responsible for increasing the cybersecurity, and also when it comes to creating audits, please keep in mind that there are a lot of audits in all areas of activity, even the banking sector, and they're all checkboxes. So the difference between let's do a checkbox and let's be sure that these guys really know what they're talking about, that they are up to speed, that they know the latest developments, how would you ensure that unless you have a way of checking that expertise? Thank you.
I'm going to add to that because we've seen it's a very good question, and one that I also had in mind. We've seen other sectors when you put these requirements in place that the focus shifts from actual prevention and real world measures to compliance and formalizing like a checklist of we've done this and this and this, and not on actual prevention. And we've seen in the payment card industry many cases of data breaches at organizations that were PCI compliant at the moment of the breach. So that means that those organizations had passed an audit, and that showed that everything was fine and they were compliant with the PCI standards, yet they were still breached. And I'd like to also ask what happens in those cases if in this context, if a service provider is breached while the audit showed that it was okay and they were fine. Are they still penalized in some way? Are they still susceptible to fines, or they get a clean slate?
To answer the last one, probably. Currently, no. They're not subject to fines. However, it depends on the contract. So here it depends on what, because this is a contract between two private parties, well, in most of the cases. So it's the contract between, for example, a bank and an auditor. So it depends what it says there that the auditor should do and what's their responsibility during the process, including a responsibility for not performing their job too well. So that's possible, but that's a private deal between companies. And to answer to Mirchat's question first, I don't think that an authorization regime would actually give this benefit to the people that are. I mean, you will not get necessarily better auditors. I know examples from other lines of industries that try to do that. So there are a number of industries that try to get continuous professional education. And what it turns out in the end is just another line of business of companies that either do trainings for low money or they only give you the certificate without being present at the training. So this may happen in any line of business, and the authorization doesn't necessarily solve this problem. However, what it might create is the problem of a very closed, maybe elite group that actually does not permit innovation or new people coming from the outside. And in all the cases of regulated professions in Romania that I know, and I know a few, this is what is happening. And also what I want to say, what would be the solution? I think the solution would be not to focus on the person, but to focus on the report, as it was mentioned earlier. Because if you accredit a person, doesn't necessarily mean that they will do a good job. It just depends on their own persona and ethics and how they relate to the companies. On the other hand, we should also look at the free market tools. So ideally, if an auditor doesn't do their job properly, they will not be called back by the same company or by a sister company, or maybe there is let's say internal sectorial group that has a list. Also, what CERT could do could also try and have a system of grading those people that did the audits. You know, but it's not something ex ante. It's not to put a barrier before entering into a market.
Okay, so may I have a small intervention now? Here, again, me, Mircea, here. So what you're actually saying is CERTRO as a national authority should be responsible, because this is what the directive says, on increasing the level of cybersecurity in Romania, and yet should have no means of certifying anyone who could do an audit. Pretty much changes nothing. And also, how would you feel if you were to be responsible for something like that? And please bear in mind that we're talking about essential service operators and digital service providers, sorry. So pretty much essential service operators are critical infrastructure, and nobody said about anything about how these auditors would be in the market. So pretty much what you're trying to insinuate now is that we're going to create a new job, a new description, a job description, but there is no such thing right now in any text. And let's be serious about it. This is just like fear talking. It's obvious that everyone could have an opportunity to take an exam, to be an open job, instead of having experts like the Ministry of Justice experts that were there only because they lined up and signed up for a list. And
yeah, I'm glad that you took the Ministry of Justice list. That's a very good example on how things do not work. But first, so the directive...
Please don't be the judge and executioner before the actual text is up and running.
So first, the directive has one sentence when they mention qualified auditor, is in Article 15. The rest is up to the member state. So it's up to each state to decide what is the policy in this regime. So it's nothing that the directive imposes that you should use a system of certification or authorization of auditors. Second, the system that you mentioned, the justice system, with legal IT experts is the best example of things that do not work. So currently in Romania, in order to present yourself in front of a judge as an IT expert, you need to be on a list which is approved by the Ministry of Justice, and you need to pass a test in front of a Ministry of Justice team, which knows nothing about IT and IT security. So what turns out into is that we have 5 people on the list. So in all the trials in Romania, in Bucharest at least, you need to appeal to one of these 5 persons that they have a certain age and they haven't been renewed, and no good IT expert is actually incentivized in order to go on this list. So this is a perfect example of closed business that doesn't work, and actually it creates more problem for the justice system because the judge is reluctant to accept an IT expert which is not on the list.
How does the CERT way of auditing or certifying auditors work?
Okay, but let's not turn this into a conversation. Let's let the panelists answer first.
I would like to add something to this. First of all, the directive says, gives the option for the member states to actually check if the operators are compliant with the law in 2 ways. One of them is by the authority doing the actual audit, which means going to the actual infrastructure of the operator or the service provider, getting into checking their systems, seeing their data, and so on, which raises other problems in our society, or use auditors from the market. The group that developed the law proposal took the second option, so that the authority would have only the option to appeal to the market. So the next problem raised in the discussions was, okay, but how do you ensure that the control which you have to do as an authority is actually effective in this case, and an auditor would not just pass as everything okay in that infrastructure, and then you have an incident which can lead, for instance, at the hospital, at the death of some patients in the emergency service, like it was about to happen with the attacks in the spring in UK, for instance. So you need an efficient compliance control mechanism, and but also we have our local Romanian challenges in this. So this is why actual input and feedback and we have is needed, and we have to find the best safeguards also that would ensure that the law is transposing the directive, and we will have a system which will function.
Okay. So the conclusion is that it's an open question, and there's obviously room for improvement. And if you are interested in participating, obviously try to participate in the public debates, send your proposals, and they will be taken into consideration, both during the ministry phase of drafting the legislation and during the parliament phase. And I'd like to change the topic a bit, because we could talk about auditors and details all day long. But in my point of view, the legislation creates a few opportunities, business opportunities, right? Aside from the auditors, you also, CERT-RO will not function as a traditional CERT. It will not come into your company and actually help you respond to a security incident. They will offer guidance, they will offer coordination, but you will have to either have an internal CERT, or you'll have to externalize that and contract from a company that specializes in incident response and computer forensics and all of that. So this creates an opportunity for businesses, and probably good news for many of you here who work in security companies. On the other hand, there's also a skills shortage in our industry. And this puts even more pressure because now public institutions and companies will go out looking to hire security personnel. IT personnel specializes in IT security for their internal needs, and they will compete with security companies who already hire professionals in this field and offer very attractive salaries. So it will be very difficult. So my question is, starting from that part of the panel, if there are any initiatives or programs with academia and training centers to specialize more people in cybersecurity, because there will obviously be a need for it. Also with GDPR, which is also coming. So it will also create a need in public institutions and the private sector for more security practitioners. And also it creates an opportunity, it's a related question, creates an opportunity for, and this hasn't been mentioned a lot, for the cybersecurity insurance market, which is underdeveloped in Europe, and probably I don't even know if it exists in Romania, because companies could offset some of those costs that they incur in case of a breach. They have to respond, they have to hire an external company, they have to notify the public in case of GDPR, legal assistance and all that, and all that costs money. And at least in the United States, there are insurance packages specialized for incident response that could limit the losses suffered by a company, whereas in Europe, cybersecurity insurance is kind of packaged with the traditional insurance for damage, for fire, for accidents, for things like that. So are there any initiatives to encourage this new market segment of cybersecurity insurance, and are there any challenges there?
I mean, I think that's a better question in terms of the initiatives for the people in the executive role on security. We're definitely supportive of that, and I think your question and the previous discussion raises a few things that I want to address. I think, increasing the security is in the company's best interest. You don't need the state to follow your best interest for you. It's a fallacy. I mean, it doesn't work like that. You can't have some centralized body responsible for the security of critical infrastructure, whether in the public or private domain. It has, that there needs to be a level of self-regulation of the industry. You could have this permitting authorization system and still have it be a checkbox or a rubber stamp. And we have the example of road safety. There was another European directive for road safety auditors starting in 2008. Do you know how many auditors there were authorized in Romania until last year? 12. And most of them were bad. And the road safety hasn't improved. So I think the role of the central authority goes beyond being a whip that ensures you have good security. It's also about awareness, about, like you mentioned, training programs, about creating a framework where things can be left to the market and the actors that are for sure will follow their best interests, because nobody wants to be breached.
The insurance market, it's a tough question, and even in the US, I haven't seen it implemented in a way that companies would not have security measures, and so it helps at some point, but it doesn't take security off the table for a corporation.
Right, but it creates an incentive to implement security, because then you can buy cybersecurity insurance.
You're right. It's on the other hand, is not applicable on critical infrastructure and the NIST directive, because we're talking about human lives, and there is no insurance that can cover that. You need to do all the preemptive security that you can in order to ensure that the failure of your systems is not putting in danger lives or the well-being of citizens or patients or customers in any form. So I don't see insurance in this market. But
Peter will a fine. I mean, you can put a price on human life. I mean,
well, the fine actually enforces the regulation and puts pressure on the irresponsible companies to make sure that they are doing all they can and they do the proper investments to ensure that those incidents are not likely to happen. So the investment is into preemptive and into prevention of incidents rather than doing forensic afterwards, right? So it's a tough subject, but as I said before, I don't think it's largely applicable to NIST and critical infrastructure. It is more of a SMB market initiative, if or even for large enterprises for specific systems, if it's more appropriate.
So more applicable to GDPR, maybe.
Probably yes, because that doesn't take into consideration a lot of bad things. I mean, Yahoo has all the passwords already out, right? So what can be worse than that? And nobody died off of that, right? So it's bad having PII, personally identifiable information, out in the public, but
it's quantifiable.
Exactly, but if you leave, we don't need to get into examples.
The skills shortage.
The skill shortage. Another good question. The skill shortage, it was one of the focus that I was trying to get a grip on in the Romanian education system, but it's not easy. It's not easy because we don't have teachers. We don't have the setup that allows us to be flexible with new technologies. All the setup that we have in education actually brings with it a lot of inertia and brings with it exactly the opposite of what we need in the IT world. Being able to teach about blockchain the year after it came out in the market and be able to be very flexible with new technologies so that we adopt and we innovate at a very early stage. We have a lot of master's degrees, so we do have some specialization in IT security. I see some universities even with 6 to 10 programs of masters. There is some movement in învățământul dual, dual education, which is formally known as professional schools or industrial schools. So there may be ways to identify skills for people that would like to remain in the IT or development work or security in whatever used to be a very dedicated workforce type of high school. So we can try some pilots and have some schools like that in Bucharest or in the IT centers in the country and see how that is turning out in the end. That's about it. We see, and another initiative that I had is actually moving a lot of moving a program, an IT dedicated program to high school and even lower than high school. CERTRO has some good initiatives. They put together a sanitization movie that is being shown in schools around the world, so kids know how to use internet and Facebook and other web applications. So initiatives like this are, I think are very helpful at early stages, and maybe even a more developed program later on would help with more awareness in terms of security. And dedicated schools will actually help us address the skill set of the people that would like to remain in the industry, not just being aware of the industry.
Okay. If you have something to add to these questions, and we can go to the second point raised by Bogdan, the one regarding the level of the fines.
Just to add about the programs set up by CERTRO, also we have, this was the second year of a cybersecurity course for journalists, because the media should be able to reflect and properly address and communicate to the public what is actually going on and how the public should protect itself. And in general, we cannot go with only one specialization. We need to, technicians need to also be aware of the legal part of what they are doing, the implications of, for instance, when you apply GDPR, you need to know the legal implications, the technical aspects, and so on. So it would be desirable to see more programs that would develop a multidisciplinary approach to the training of actual workers.
Okay. And if you want to answer Bogdan's other points about the level of fines, the transparency issue, and the law enforcement.
Okay. First of all, regarding the level of fines, the directive clearly states that the fines that could go to a level where they are dissuasive. So the actual percentage from the turnover of a company as a principle, we see it also in GDPR. The actual figures, these are to be decided until the legislative process gone. But it's an obligation through the directive to also have such fines. And in general, to the state, each member state has the obligation to actually ensure that the NIS directive is applied effectively. So any other mechanisms that we see in the proposed law are actually the bare minimum which could be identified from the directive, with the exception of what we've discussed today about the auditors, simply because there was the other concern of having only formal audits and as a measure to ensure the compliance with this directive. And next,
cooperation with law enforcement, or whether you have an obligation to report things to law enforcement and things like that.
Well, by the Romanian law, there is this obligation. Then, of course, reporting to the law enforcement a crime is mandatory. But in this question, the problem is who actually is the part that commits that breaks the law. Because if we are talking about the operators of essential services, we first of all the obligation would be to report, but on the other, from when the criminal is the one who breached the network of the operator of essential services, then reporting could be the obligation of the actual operator. The guidelines that CERT would provide would also indicate this. And well, maybe
And do you want to address the transparency as well, like public reports, public notifications, when the incident is large enough, will CERT come out and say, hey, this is what happened, and will there be periodic or annual reports, transparency reports, this many incidents in these sectors?
The directive has also an article stating that the authority should inform the public in cases where this would be for administering, would be useful for administering an incident. This is the part that we, for now, took in the working group took into the project, but the concerns and recommendations raised here of actually communicating to the public also the statistics and the so that the public can take can learn something and take proper measures to protect themselves. Well, this actually is going on also right now in CERT-RO. This will be also included in the text of the proposal that will be forwarded for adoption, because otherwise, without exchanging information, without providing information to the public and reports and so on, and methods of attack and vulnerabilities newly discovered and so on, you cannot have cybersecurity.
I'm just saying because the public might want to know that the law is actually effective, or maybe other bodies of the parliament is there parliamentary control over the activity of CERT-RO, and because if you see like a report where you see there have been this many incidents this year but very few fines, then you might wonder why that is, right? I mean, are these requirements actually enforced, or just the reporting and nothing happens, right? So I also like, because don't have much time left, I'd like to take one or two questions from the audience. Microphones.
Hello, I'm Cristian Mustață, Senior Integration Engineer, and I'm interested in fake news concerning cybersecurity. How do you do not to spread the fake news by yourselves? And this is regarding the attack on Astra Insurance Company, which from my point of view, it was a fake news. And it was present on your Facebook account.
Okay, I'm not sure if insurance companies fall under this legislation. If you want to address it, maybe you can. But let's take another question, just so we have.
I can answer that if you don't mind. Again,
Let's
I work for CERT-RO, so you know why. The Astra Insurance is not fake news. It was reported as such by KPMG. So if you want to know what really happened there, please ask KPMG. Regarding what was posted on our website, it was posted on our website after KPMG has done a public disclosure. It was in the media. So regarding the transparency that Bogdan was very concerned about, we try very hard not to disclose people that are affected, because we don't want to have any kind of prejudice done to them. We don't want to tarnish their image in any way. So that's why we try not to say, well, this happened or that happened. And if you're thinking about cybersecurity incidents, please bear in mind that each year we process around 4 million. If we were to make a list out of it, nobody in the market probably wouldn't be there. So this is not fake news. But regarding fake news, there is an initiative from the European Commission to tackle that problem in the future. There is a proposal about trusted flaggers and so on. We don't know how things will work out in the future, but still there is something done even at European level. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another question from the audience? People affected by this? No? Okay. I can ask some other questions then. Do you want to address the
Yeah,
fake news issue, or
if no,
because it's not
no,
it's not
no,
about naming
no,
and shaming
not
companies,
not
but
about
when it's obvious that something happened at I don't know, an electrical company, it's obvious because there was a power outage. So in that case, you can't really avoid not saying it was that company because you know where the outage occurred. What's important there is that it happened because of a cyber attack and not because of a equipment failure or something like that. It happened because of a cyber attack, and if it happened because of a cyber attack, other people in the sector might want to know, and the public.
Yeah. So I will not touch directly on fake news, but indirectly on the transparency a bit. Just to answer also to Mircea what he was saying. So yes, it's the fear talking when I'm saying that. I'm very provocative when I'm saying about this because it's the fear talking, because we had one cybersecurity law which was clearly unconstitutional, because we have the Secret Service that has I think 35 secret deals with other state bodies, and we don't know how the data is being transmitted. And because it is a field that we know that there are people involved, and we need to be sure that we have the guarantees in the law that at least it helps us a bit in this situation. So at least we have the bare minimum in this domain. As regard to transparency, let me give you two examples that I think are important. So a few years ago, there was a security incident at the .ro domain name, .ro/TLD. And the fact was that actually they announced that, if I remember correctly, like 3 days after or 1 week after. It was very, very late. And
after I reported it.
Exactly. So yeah, bad boy. So yeah, that's one example that is relevant. We asked for the public report after that. We said we want to know what happened. We want to know what it can publicly be said about it. And I think we waited like 3 months for it. And basically the answer that we got, we said, we had a problem, we solved the problem. And we're like, come on, that's all you can get us? Were the .ro affected? Were the domain names? Do we need to change the password? Stuff like that. So this is something that we need to address, and there need to be some rules very clearly in this respect. And on the other hand, there needs to be the capacity from the state companies and from the state institutions to reply to this kind of things. The second example that I want to give, and maybe I get the things right. So a few days ago, there was the RSA. There was discovered a vulnerability in RSA, which affected also the electronic ID cards of the Estonian system.
Okay, yeah, it was in the Infineon chips from smart cards and TPMs, in the sense that if you generated a key with those chips,
Thank you.
The key was much weaker than it was supposed to be. So, for example, you generated a 2048-bit key, it was much weaker than 2048, which meant that given enough computing power, you could factor from a public key the private key, so it compromised the whole keys that were used for digital signing and people authenticating with them. And in Estonia, being a very e-government-focused country.
So in this case, there were about 700,000 electronic IDs that were affected and were suspended by the Estonian authority. And I think this is a very clear case that should ask us two questions. The first one, do we want an electronic ID card, and what are the security requirements for it? And we've actually asked a lot of questions to the Ministry of Internal Affairs. And for example, we asked for a public security audit on it, and they refused it. They said, no, we do an internal one, not a public one. The second question is, what should be the measures that need to be taken in this kind of securities if we'll have the electronic ID cards? And this is where the NIS directive should answer this.
The response plan.
The response plan. Do you inform those persons? Do you inform them directly? Do you call them? Or you just tell them, that your EID has been suspended. Go and update your certificate. It's complicated. It's not easy, but these are the kind of cases that needs to be discussed.
Let me answer a bit of those questions. First of all, related to the Estonian ID cards, actually not 700,000, all of them were affected, but there was no loss of private information. I was actually in Estonia when that happened, and I was just talking to the CIO there.
Okay, but
Yeah,
is that a
because that was
security
reported
incident?
responsibly.
Yeah,
Some security
I'm getting-
researchers found it and reported it responsibly to Infineon, and they got
Exactly.
patches from Microsoft. And it
I'm
wasn't.
getting to that point right now, and it was just a point answer. GDPR is taking the lead into transparency. Every breach that has any personal information within it needs to be publicly reported. So this is being covered already by a regulation which has a much higher power than the NIS directive, which allows member states to transpose it to the best of their legal basis in the
But
member states.
it's not publicly reported, it's reported to the Data Protection Authority. It's not public.
Yeah,
There is a difference.
But you have a collection of all the breaches in one authority, and whoever is being affected knows about it. And I think this is your main concern.
My concern as a journalist and as a people who someone who informs the public, and I try to be very accurate in my reporting, is that companies should be open about what went wrong and how they fixed it, and the things the measures they had in place, and be upfront about what went wrong. And in my experience, in terms of brand damage and customer churn, right, where customers abandon the brand, companies that were very transparent and upfront about what happened. Here's the vulnerability we had. Here's the failure. This is why it happened. This is what we did. This is how we mitigated it. Those companies, actually, customers appreciated that, right? Okay, customers are able to understand that there's no perfect security and a breach will happen, and companies need to have the mindset that I will be breached at some point, and I need to have a response plan in place. There's no perfect prevention, but when it happens, customers need to know and will appreciate knowing what went wrong and what has been done, rather than someone saying, like in the raw TLD case, we had a problem, we fixed it, and that's all, without any details, without anything, lessons learned or anything like that.
All the way to the Takama, or what's the name of the company with the airbags that disappeared in the thin air. But anyhow, there are companies taking a big hit, like the airbag company, and there are companies that can absorb the hit depending on the type of breach that they have or problems that they have. The point that I was still trying to continue after the GDPR is that the NIS directive is actually in charge of other systems. And those systems, we need to look at them differently than we look at personal information that is being disclosed during a breach or after a breach, versus the type of information systems that are being protected with the NIS directive. That information, if it contains personal information, then of course the breach is being reported, like you said. If not, then it's a critical system for the state, and a different type of handle needs to be in place to cover that particular breach. And maybe that will be the role of CERTRO. I'm not sure even if the EU has been has defined the way of being transparent about this. So I think it's open floor yet.
Yeah. Just to clarify on this, when I said transparency, I never meant that all the reports to CERT should be public. What I said, there were two things. The first one is that we need to have statistical information and public information about things that happened. And I gave yesterday the example of CERT that actually, in the case of the CryptoLocker, I think it was CryptoLocker, they went public and they said we had 3 complaints, 2 from public sector, 1 from private sector. That's perfect. That's kind of information that we want to know. And the second one is related when companies are actually using the relationship with CERT to prevent certain information from being public. And I also gave yesterday an extreme example, but I'm provocative again, with the case that CERT.ro published on the Wizard phishing. They published yesterday that it was a Wizard fake site that was trying to get personal information, which was great. So what if Wizard would have said to CERT.ro, we have this problem with this phishing website, but we don't want to make this public? What would you do? So these are the kind of cases, and what I don't want to happen is that through this law, it will limit the possibility of CERT to react in the public interest. That was the point of transparency.
On the Wizz Air news, just one comment. I like the all the domains that are being used to provoke other phishing attacks. So you had also a list at the end of the article where you could check if other campaigns similar to this one are being issued. So
I also want to ask to give the opportunity to Catalin to comment on the transparency, because this proposal will go to the parliament and there's an opportunity for amendments, and whether the parliament can actually make them more transparent, and what's your opinion on that?
You can definitely do that. That's the role of the debate that we will have in the parliament. And actually, I want to thank you for the discussion today, and it has shown that there are still a lot of things on the table, and I think the only way to improve is through such discussion and debate. We have to be very careful about the provisions there, like Bogdan was saying, because they might actually, we know, you know how state entities work, and if there's a provision in the law that's too strict, sometimes you can't act in the public interest. So you have to be very careful that you don't have your hands tied about releasing information that could actually contribute to the public interest and security. We want to have very soon, in the next few weeks, once we get the draft law or the project actually in the parliament, a debate, and it will be open for all stakeholders. We're waiting for you there.
Gentlemen, sorry to barge in, but we're kind of done with our time. So I will leave room for one question, and then we're going to go to lunch.
Okay. Do we have one question?
I could do a comment.
Well,
Okay.
he wants to do a comment as well, so.
Just to add something to the Wizz Air case. Actually, if Wizz Air would have come to CERT and said that they don't want this public, if we strictly apply what is in the directive, the authority would be obliged to communicate to the public in order to actually stop this and alert the public not to visit those sites.
So I guess what Bogdan is saying, that there needs to be in the law more clarity about what kind of information is supposed to stay confidential, like business secrets and things like that, to protect the business interest of the company, and what information cannot be secret and will make it out to the public if needed. And if you want to add
Okay, so the comment is this. Regarding transparency, CERT does not publish affected parties. However, for the sake of public interest, when it is a phishing campaign, we will publish it. It doesn't matter that the name is Wizz Air or whatever. If there are people that could get infected, we will publish it, because one of the main things that CERT has to do is to provide a safer environment, and you can do that only by sharing this kind of knowledge with the public. Regarding the role of the NIS directive on ID cards and digital signatures, please bear in mind that there is a directive on eIDAS. You should check that out. It's not what the NIS directive is dealing with. However, it should be complementary.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to thank our panelists today for making the time to come here and go through all of these questions and explain their point and share their point of view. And thanks all of you for attending, and I hope you found this informative. Thank you.
Thank you.